Good afternoon. This is Daniel Stein. Welcome to Project UNIFY weekly meeting, September 7th. We'll be reviewing the consent service utility and hearing a presentation from Digital Locker. Resume the recording. So welcome everybody. I think we have a quorum here, which is great. Welcome to the UNIFY meeting. And I know we have a couple of new people on. So yes, that is the way we kind of start. Pretty informal, which is kind of part of the fun part of the group here. So welcome everybody to the meeting today. Generally, let me see, we have a little bit of a formal agenda, not too much here. We're going to do a couple of things. First off is we're going to do introduction. So new people on the call, we subject you to sort of an interrogation. No, it's just an introduction, where you're from, who you are, kind of get a sense of the folks who are here, or people who haven't been here in a while, just to kind of reintroduce yourselves there, just to kind of keep it going. We've been doing this for a couple of years, and so the group is usually around this size, 20 to 30 people who attend. So we'll do that, and then we'll just spend a little bit of time with some brief updates on what's going on out there, if anything new around consent work that's happening, some of the architectural work, and then today we have a presentation from Noah Harlan and some of his colleagues from Kiip around digital locker, as I'm referring to it. I don't know if that's exactly the way you guys refer to it, but Mary Sarah Jones had made the introduction a number of weeks ago. So today's the day we had a chance to hear a little bit from folks about that particular solution. And then there's, as you'll see on the screen here, there's a couple of upcoming meetings that we're trying to schedule for the next couple of weeks on related topics, a couple on justice, and then actually earlier today I had Christine and I had a conversation with the folks from EHRA, the Electronic Health Records Association, to try to bring them into the conversation as well. And then our colleagues from Texas, and then also Criminal Justice Youth Prevention Program from Arizona. We're trying to schedule some time. So we're trying to get a little farther out ahead over the next 3-4 weeks to be able to kind of project this out and talk about different topics that are continuing to be of interest here to us. So with that, let me just call on some folks who are new to the call here. And I absolutely have to call on Linda Gibbs. If this is India Gibbs, sorry, or Linda, India or Linda?
Sure. Hello. Can you all see me?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. Nice to join you all. I'm actually the executive assistant at Kiip, but I tend to join many calls as I am very deeply rooted in community advocacy. So I'm happy to join you all and listen for today's information.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you very much. There's a colleague of mine whose name is Linda Gibbs, who used to work in New York City. I was like, oh, how did Linda get here? So glad you made it here. So Karina?
Hey everybody, I'm Karina. I'm part of the Kiip team. I work with the product design team doing user research, so I stay in close dialogue with people who are using our product. Happy to be here.
That sounds great. And Sean, I see you're on the call. You made it today. That's great.
Yep. Hi, Sean Gunderson. I'm out of Phoenix, Arizona, and I work in technology, focusing on the interoperability at the intersection of justice, health, and social, and trying to bring groups together to implement. Thank you.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Logan.
Hi, everyone. I am also part of the Kiip team. My name is Logan Edwards. I'm the head of partnerships and accounts here. I'm very excited to meet you all and continue building our partnerships and our networks. I'm very excited. Thank you.
Thanks, Logan. And I think no, I think you're maybe Phil Robinson as well, but Noah, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, I'm Noah Harlan. I'm the CEO of Kiip. Very excited to be sharing it with you. I have to say, as I discovered today, in an email thread with Daniel and then with Jim. This kind of brings together two big passions in my life. I've spent the last 14 years building software for all different types of organizations, but also along that journey became really involved with the Linux Foundation and wound up in the senior leadership as a director of not one but two different open source consortia, one of which I co-founded, and led the merger of one of those with a very large standards body. So when it comes to technology, software, standards, that's my happy place. So I'm happy to arrive here. And then also I have to state for the record, I like bell peppers. So let that sit where it will.
Well, we'll keep you guys separated on the screen at least for a couple of people in between you there, which would be great. Thanks. That's great. That convergence is wonderful, and I must say that Mary Sarah was a very strong, loud advocate for getting you guys on the call here. So thank you thank you for that, Mary Sarah.
You should have just mentioned that he worked for the Linux Foundation much sooner than now. That's all I got.
Well, technically, I served as a director of Linux Foundation projects, and the Linux Foundation was a client of my previous company, Two Bowls. We built software for the Linux Foundation itself, but I was not an employee of the Linux Foundation.
It's close enough. You had a .org email address. We'll go with that. So.
That works.
Over to you, Phil.
I'm Phil Robinson. I think I'm the last Kiip member to join here today. I'm the Chief Experience Officer. I oversee kind of the product, voice of the customer, research, all that good stuff.
Great, welcome. And then we have two folks on phone, 480 and 925, and I don't remember 480. Is that Christine?
No, it's Mary Sarah Daniel.
Oh, okay. There you go. So you're up twice. And 925 is?
Hi, Daniel. It is John Kim.
Oh, okay. You're on. Okay, my phone there. Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, the reception, the Wi-Fi wasn't great here, so I joined over the audio too.
That's great. I say that about Long Island all the time. It's part of the developing country here outside of New York City. So they're working on the Wi-Fi. We're not there yet altogether, but it's pretty soon there. So welcome everyone. We won't. I think I was wondering if Brian's not on the call here. I don't think today with us. I was going to ask him to do a little bit of an overview, but I think he's down with the COVID, so he's feeling pretty bad. So I think he's not joining us at the moment in time. So
he still has COVID?
I think he got it again. I think he went to, I think that was a parting gift from the Civitas conference, I believe.
Yes, he did come down with it after he got home. We've been back for a week now, right? This afternoon. So if he got it a day or so later, he's still well within being sick.
Yeah.
If he got a bad case.
Oh, that's too bad.
He was not sounding terribly happy. So unfortunately, well, he may drag himself to the call yet today. We'll see. But hopefully not too many other people got sick from that. Mary Sarah, you look awake, and so hopefully that is you've recovered from. I think you got exposed, right? Weren't you feeling kind of?
I did. Yeah, I'm feeling a lot better, but my eyes, you can still tell in my eyes, they look a little heavy. But yes, I'm feeling so much better.
Yeah. I had gotten it when we came back from vacation. It took about 2.5, 3 weeks to really kind of get through the malaise and just the fatigue of it, which was unfortunate. But the good news is I could take a nap whenever.
The brain fog I was not expecting. I mean, I felt like I aged 20 years overnight.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it will evaporate soon. It seems to do that after a certain period of time. It just like goes away there. So hopefully that will be good. So so just a few notes, and then we'll jump into the demo and get into the conversation here. Continuing to have a lot of conversations with folks around the consent work and the consent proof of concepts. Our colleagues in both in New York and Hennepin County, and Connor, who's on the call here, was gracious last week to give us an overview of what's happening with Hennepin. And simultaneously, we connected with the state folks. So we're actually connecting county and state sometime next week to get on the same page with that, which is terrific. And it continues to sort of inch forward in that regard. We also are connecting on the legal side with our colleagues from the Network for Public Health Law and our colleagues from AISP from University of Pennsylvania, Dennis Culhane's group, and the work they're doing on privacy and confidentiality. So there's some converging factors and different organizations that are actually coming together in a way. And Marianne Schretzman, who's on the call with us, may be familiar with Dennis and the AISP folks as well. So trying to connect the New York folks and Ellen and all those guys together, since we're all kind of rowing in the same direction, is interesting. So that's happening. We, as I mentioned last week, I had the opportunity to sort of debrief a little bit with Stefan Konya about our meeting from the e-consent workshop, and shared with them the learning we had done together, and they were going to take that back to ONC to sort of debrief that, and hopefully they'll be coming out shortly with some summary of what's happening, next steps from the ONC perspective. I've reached out to Director McPathy and Steve Posnick as well to continue to say, hey, we're here, people are ready to go, you know, there's stuff to be done, and are continuing to sort of ring the bell to say that there is a group of folks here that are anxious to actually go implement stuff, and they've been continuing to be pretty responsive to the work. So let me pause for a second there and just check with folks if there's any other conversations, meetings from the standards groups or anything else like that that is relevant for folks to share with us. I'll open the floor for a second. Silence is deafening. Okay, so
yeah. Hi, Daniel. This is Shelley. Just wanted to chime in. I don't really have an update other than we typically have, you know, the Gravity Tech work group meeting today, but I guess it was canceled probably because Brian was not feeling well. So, no real update there.
Speaking of that, I actually have some time scheduled with Evelyn coming up, I think in the next week or so. So I'm you know, with the announcement of Civitas and Gravity trying to, you know, sort of explore how they're going to work together. I've reached out to both, and obviously Lisa Berry has presented here a couple of weeks ago, a couple months ago maybe, and also with Evelyn to try to close the loop on that, because a number of the places where we're, you know, that expressed interest, and obviously the work with Gravity Codes and with Civitas and the HIE world makes some sense for us to be in that conversation again, to sort of reduce some of the siloization that happens here, and to try to connect in, because consent is really such an important part of the overall equation. And so I don't know if there's any other conversations between, you know, that emanated from the Civitas conference around that, but I just want folks to know that continuing to sort of reach out to the active participants. Also, just as a FYI, I spoke with Ryan Howells the other day as well, trying to coordinate, again, some of the work that they're doing, having been on the e-consent discovery workshop, to try to close the loop, to make sure that everybody's kind of aware of various different moving pieces and parts. And I think we'll be trying to schedule some time with Ryan and that group later, probably at the end of the month or early October, to sort of see what Helios can, how we can sort of connect in with the work on Helios and some of the other accelerator work, just to kind of sort of be the glue that tries to connect some of these things here. So with that, I just wanted to, I had a couple slides before I turn it over to Noah here. One of the things that that I pulled from the original, one of the first presentations on the e-consent discovery workshop was this slide that was presented, and I'm spacing on the name of the presenter from ONC, who's the privacy officer. And for me, it may be obvious for folks who are deep into this work, but one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is that blue third, right? Which is the non-HIPAA covered entities. And so much of what we've been focused on, I would say, I'll include you all in that, is that group, right? The social care, justice, education, housing, all of the sort of non-HIPAA covered entities, or many of the non-covered HIPAA entities, and how do we fit into the ecosystem, so to speak, of healthcare, which is obviously the 800-pound gorilla out there. And I think as I've been talking to people and I've been thinking about it, I've been trying to distinguish those things to say that that is in a way, we're trying to figure out how do we bring those entities into the conversation, because it's not all about healthcare all the time, right? It is obviously critically important, but there's also data that's got to flow both into the non-HIPAA covered entities and then also from those entities into the healthcare world. And how do we articulate that is important, because I think depending on where you sit, you know, one might not see the other entities very effectively. And for me, this chart sort of jumped out at me in a way that maybe it did for you. I don't know if it did or didn't, but it certainly was a way that I've been helping sort of think about that. And so I just wanted to share that with you. And I know,
Daniel.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, one thing that also gets confusing, it's Mary Sarah, is that for the non-HIPAA covered entities, HIPAA is typically part of their non-functional requirements. So it's not, you know what I mean? So it's not that it doesn't play a role. It is when it comes to their technology solutions, they tend to need to be HIPAA compatible or HIPAA compliant, depending. Although the entities themselves are not HIPAA. And that confuses a lot of organizations that haven't worked with non-HIPAA entities before.
And Daniel, I'd add to Mary Sarah's excellent comments that you'll recall, of course, we spent time in the e-consent workshop discussing the fact that regardless of whether it's a HIPAA or non-HIPAA covered entity or whether or not they're HIPAA compliant, HIPAA doesn't require consent in the first place.
Mary Sarah, could you say more about what you mean by HIPAA compatible?
Yeah, so it's just if you're doing like integrated eligibility systems or child welfare, you're still going to run into HIPAA and the non-functional requirements. And it's not HIPAA like in terms of policy so much as it is HIPAA in terms of non-functional, kind of as in terms of security requirements. Mm-hmm. So it's still going to be listed in there, which is something that folks don't understand when they're thinking about the technology.
Yeah,
so you're saying like there's going to be common like security requirements.
Yep.
Whether you're talking about something that has nothing to do with HIPAA, like if you're just screening somebody for eligibility for SNAP, for example.
Right. So to give you a concrete example, Matt, we've got a CBO that we work with who is not a covered entity, but they use an electronic record system that is HIPAA compliant because they need to connect it to other things, including us, where the security requirements are essentially the same. So in order for them to share data with others, they have to get consent from their clients because they're not a covered entity or a BAA. But their system is a HIPAA compliant system.
Yeah, no, I mean, it all makes specific. Can you, sorry, I'm getting bad echo. That all makes complete sense. I think it's easy to be, it's hard, we need to be clear about what, because there's the HIPAA, privacy rule, there's the HIPAA security rule, like, HIPAA as it pertains to consent. So there's these multi-dimensional aspects of it, right? Where you can have non-covered entities that are involved in treatment for addressing social determinants of health. So yeah,
Well,
I totally understand.
Kathy, so were you suggesting that your CBO does, or were you stating that your CBO does not have a BAA for PHI exchange?
They have a BAA with us as part of their membership in the HIE because that's a requirement.
Mhm.
But they had this system for their operations long before they were a Rio member, which is their only BAA relationship that I know of. Okay.
Yeah, so they came into the equation with a system that that met the administrative safeguards for HIPAA, and then just tacked the BAA on afterwards. Got it. Okay.
Right.
Like everything around privacy and confidentiality, it's easy. It's pretty straightforward and simple. So moving right along, thank you for that. I think that's obviously part of the complexity is. The other thing I wanted to dive into before I turn it over to our colleagues here is just a quick reminder of kind of why we're even having a conversation today with Noah and his team, which is building off of the San Diego LEAP CDS model and others. The folks on this call, and led in large part by Brian and others, sort of put together a sort of a augmented version of the architecture, which is still a work in progress, to really try to incorporate the social care and other programs in the architectural approach that we're thinking about. And I had asked Brian to kind of go through this briefly, but since he's not here, I will not go through it briefly. But what I wanted to point out is that we did talk about those entities that don't have any means to identify or to capture and manage consents, right? They're not part of an EHR, they're not part of a RIO necessarily. So there is a need for a consent store, one might say. And identifying that, and this conversation came up a couple months ago to say, well, what about those CBOs that are collecting consent, putting it in a drawer, or putting it in an Access database, or putting it in some something, a SharePoint site or whatever? How do we bring them into it? And again, going back to that pie diagram, the non-HIPAA entities, how do we acknowledge those entities that need to collect consent and will need to be able to access the consent utility model, will need to access that in some way to know whether or not there's an active consent and whether or not it can be, whether or not that information can be shared or not. So that was the genesis really of well, how do we accomplish that? And Mary Sarah said, well, let's talk to these guys because this is one of the things that they do. And so that's in many ways the genesis of how do we address that issue of folks that don't have a consent management system, but that we could add in to the overall architecture so that we can accommodate those on a community by community basis or a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis to accommodate the variability and the need for that. Does that make sense? I hope so. So what that does is that kind of leads us to the conversation here about Kiip and what kind of platform and solution that you guys are working on now that we might be able to think about and talk about relative to how it could support or complement or extend out this work on consent that we're doing, particularly around organizations that don't have a system. And in particular, of specific interest actually in Minnesota, where one of our POC sites in Hennepin County is actually interested in the use case being between health and homelessness. And how do we bring those together? How do they bring those together? And how do we do that in a meaningful way? So with that as a setup, let me hand the proverbial tool over to you to do an introduction and then to take us through. I know you've got some slides, but I encourage folks to ask questions and to and then now that you've got a sort of a little better sense of what we're doing here, to actually interrogate the participants as well in terms of what would be most useful and what would be most valuable as we're thinking about the kind of questions that we're trying to encounter as we go forward here. So with that, let me hand this back to you. I think I can give you rights to share your screen if you want to do that.
I am a co-host now.
There you go. You are.
Well, thanks so much for that, and thanks everyone for giving us some time to come and have a conversation. As I said, this really sits at the intersection of some things that I've spent a lot of my career working on, and it's always fun when disparate parts of your career can come together in really nice, elegant ways. Let me start by giving a little bit of a background, and rather than kind of doing a really formal slide deck, I'll try and keep this conversational so that we can really have it as a dialogue. Kiip was born out of work that we were doing in my previous company in the public sector. We were approached by New America with a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation to talk with the cities of New York and Baltimore about issues they were having getting individuals who are experiencing homelessness, so people in emergency shelters or temporary shelters, into what's known as permanent supportive housing. And the obstacles that they face in that journey, there's kind of two big categories of obstacle. The first is just physical infrastructure, a lack of housing units that are available for people. And that is, let's call that just of a type, and that is addressed by other people in the ecosystem. But the other big problem is individuals proving that they qualify for a given benefit, and in this case, it was housing. In New York City, if you are given a spot in NYCHA housing, so you've won the lottery, there's an apartment available, as an individual, you have to submit 33 pieces of documentation in order to accept that housing unit. And that documentation does everything from get you your lease to engage in whatever housing vouchers from HUD might be supporting that. And it could be many, many more documents if you're coming in with a family or you have a more complex work history, like you're a gig economy worker instead of a W-2 employee. And in working with New York and Baltimore, what we saw was that these are issues that are manifest throughout the system, that are largely unaddressed, and that are causing massive, massive obstacles for individuals to access benefits and services that they're entitled to. And in this case, it was specifically focused around housing. AWS was working with Baltimore when we were brought into this project, and they were doing some initial proof of concept work, which they ultimately handed off to us to take through to a full pilot and proof of concept. And as we completed that, AWS said, listen, we really think you should come with us. Jesse and Mary Sarah took us around the country and introduced us to all manner of organizations, ranging from state Medicaid offices to local and national CBOs, federal agencies. And it really opened our eyes to what a much bigger issue we were it was kind of hands on the elephant thing. We were just seeing this one little piece through the door of homelessness, but in fact, this massive issue of administrative burden. And in particular for communities who you can put as at risk, disadvantaged, marginalized communities, which depending on how you want to calculate that can be, 85 to 100 million people in the US. The Medicaid and CHIP audience alone is 85 million people, as I'm sure the people on this call know. That it's this massive drag on their ability to obtain the things that they have a right to, but it's also a huge burden on the organizations that are trying to serve them, because trying to get people to submit their information consistently, and then with so many of these programs, you have to certify and recertify or qualify and requalify on semi-annual or annual bases, and you wind up with huge amounts of churn, and that churn can be very expensive on the administrative side. For instance, someone who churns out of SNAP, research suggests that there's about $80 per individual in administrative costs when an individual churns out of SNAP. And in just some jurisdictions, you'll see as many as 25% of people churning out each year and then having to qualify back in. So it's a massive, massive amount of money that's being spent. Putting aside the fact that as a government agency, to process an application for an individual to access a given benefit or service, on average, it takes about an hour, and about half of that time, not linear, it's an hour if you add up all the time end to end, and about half of that time is spent wrangling documents in one way or another. And so Kiip was born out of that context. And again, I'm quite certain I'm preaching to the choir here. My spiel very often has to educate people on what administrative burden is, but I suspect I'm talking to some experts here. So Kiip has two components to it. On the one side, we offer for individuals a free, safe, secure, simple way to permanently store their documents, to manage those documents, and to share those documents. It's free for life for the individuals. We're a public benefit corporation, and our mission is to provide that. On the other side of the equation, and this is really the key part, is we provide organizations with better tools to interact with those individuals so they can receive those documents. Each organization gets a portal through which they can have individual interactive data rooms with every participant or client, depending on what they describe them as. They have the ability to chat with those individuals in our latest release. They can receive documents, and we have built into the platform the consents necessary for an individual who provides explicit sharing of each of their documents to each organization. But where we kind of flip a little bit from traditional portals is the way that things are built today by most organizations is that every organization has its own portal, and an individual needs to transact separately in each of those portals. What we did is we kind of flipped that on its head, and we said, well, what if the individual has all their documents in one place, and then each organization becomes effectively another room that that individual has access to? And so a document that gets shared to one organization can, with a single click, be effectively shared to as many other organizations who are on the platform as needed. Of course, they can download that document and share it off platform if they need to. It's their information to do with whatever, however, and whatever they need to. And what we're really focused on now is how do we help organizations become more efficient so that they spend less of their time dealing with the friction of getting people, getting information back and forth with individuals, and instead providing whatever the direct services are that they need to, and doing that in a way that's very privacy centric. So we really focus our entire platform around making sure that individuals have explicit understanding of what's happening with their information. So we have activity logs so they can see when one of their documents has been viewed or downloaded and by whom, by providing very explicit sharing. And we even have it built so that there's only one copy of a document in our system, and the individual effectively, when they share that document, are providing a voucher to the organization that says that organization has my permission to view my document and to download it and use it as they need to provision their services to me. Now, the conversation here around consent is really interesting. I mean, we've obviously thought about consent and how that works in terms of within our platform, but it's really a gnarly question when it comes to how do all these organizations then share this information onward. And some of our information would fall under HIPAA. We are not directly, obviously, a HIPAA participant. And let me also state for the record, Kiip itself does not view the contents of any document. The private information that we track in our system is the user's name, their email address, and the basic profile information to identify who they are. But the contents of the document are private to the individual and to any organization that they share that information with. So we as a platform do not view the contents of that information. We may know what type of information it is. So for example, we might have categorization around, is it a driver's license? Is it a health record? And that can help us over time in ensuring that people have the right sets of documents ready when they approach an organization to apply for something, and can help inform them that they're going to need to gather other types of documentation. But really, that's what Kiip's about. We are early in our lifespan, but we've been signing up a really interesting cross-section of organizations around the country, ranging from groups focused on homelessness, groups focused on prison reentry populations. We've got conversations that are going with groups that are focused on individuals who are aging out of foster care. We also are working in Arizona with a tremendous group that works with neurodiversities and adults with neurodiverse conditions. We have a feature in the platform where any individual can invite an assistant to help them manage their documents. So that's great for people with diminished capacity or who are not of age to give legal consent. So that could be a family member, a caregiver, a social worker, a legal representative. We're also working with some organizations focused on veterans, and in particular around veterans in transition out of military service. There's a lot of areas where we dovetail with the notion of consent, but I'm really interested in, as you were showing some of those documents, I want to dig through some of those frameworks in more detail, and Jim would certainly know where my head's going on that. But thinking through what are the ways in which we can help facilitate the movement of consent alongside. Mary, Sarah, and I have had a lot of conversations around HIEs, and there's a lot of information. You have your direct health record information that's moving around, potentially through an HIE or otherwise. But then there's also a whole bunch of other information, often SDOH information or other information that does not necessarily travel on the same rails. And being able to provide another means for individuals to move that information efficiently through the system is incredibly valuable, because an individual who shows up for medical care, there's a whole bunch of other services that you may need to enroll, you may want to get that person engaged with, that are going to exist outside of the medical record system, but are going to be critical pieces of documentation. So that's kind of the background on it. I'm more than happy to walk through on features or give a demo, but I think it was maybe better if I just gave that spiel for this audience, and then we can kind of take it from there.
Well, and Noah, the most simple use case would be just to share the document itself. So I think a lot of the folks on the in the meeting, part of the problem is that if they have a shared customer or patient and that individual signs a consent form, a physical form, how do they manage that physical signature across all of those organizations to verify that the individual has indeed consented? So this would allow that single form to be visible across many organizations based on the determination of the individual whose form it is.
That's correct.
And Noah, just for clarity, you were saying that the individual controls that S3 repository or whatever that's got their personal docs in it for accessibility.
Correct. Okay. The data room is a place of interaction, but each individual has, you can think of it as their personal vault. And so not every document that an individual has control over would they necessarily be sharing with every organization. So an individual who's applying for SSDI may need to share some health records there to prove disability, but if they're then also applying for SNAP, they probably are not sharing health records there. And so the individual needs to be able to choose which documents are shared in which rooms. So you have your vault and then you have your rooms. and the individual is explicitly in control of what flows.
And the rooms are created on an ad hoc basis, depending on that particular business process or who you're engaging with.
Correct. And the business model for us, which may be a question, is organizations pay for the number of rooms they need, and they pay once they open a room, they have that, it's the number of rooms that they need over the course of a year. So we don't do seat licenses. So we don't necessarily judge how many people in your organization need to interact. It's about how many individuals do you need to open rooms with.
So if a person is applying for a program and they go into one of these rooms, do you have like okay, here are the 5 types of documents that you need to upload for this particular program? Or do you know what I'm saying? Do you have like essentially the eligibility requirements or the documents they need to upload listed so they can see it?
So that's a feature that we're building out at the moment. We call them recipes. So any organization would be able to actually build their own custom recipes to say, these are the types of, whether it is we need these explicit documents or we need the kind of, one from column A and one each from columns B and C type models. And that's where the categorization I mentioned earlier comes into play. So, we know you have a driver's license. We don't know your driver's license content, but this organization requires a driver's license to complete this application. You're in good stead. So part of our product theory, if you will, is that helping to push that information further upstream so that as an individual begins their interaction, they know what's going to be required of them, means that hopefully they'll be able to complete those processes faster because they'll come in having already gathered some of those materials or knowing what materials they're missing and they need to now get.
And Noah, notwithstanding the fact that you don't capture any metadata from the document content now, is the system ultimately capable of doing that to start dynamically controlling or advising in the vault at the metadata level?
So yes, and we've been giving a lot of thought to how to go about that in a way that is very privacy centric. And so right now, our kind of theory of operation around that is there are times when people may need to validate a document. So for instance, can we ping the Social Security Administration's API that will validate a Social Security card information? And what we would offer the individual is to say, will you give us limited access to the information on this card so that we can validate it? And then when we present the card, we'll be able to prevent a kind of certificate of authenticity, if you will, saying we polled the SSA on this date and time, and this information was returned as valid from the SSA. And so that would be a limited grant by the individual to us to examine a document. The other use case that we see is as we move further down the application process, to say, we can accelerate the speed with which you can fill out the following forms by giving us a limited grant of access to the metadata on this document. And in those scenarios, we may be able to pull content and pre-fill certain essential information. But we're going to do it all in an explicit consent model. And there, we have a range of tools like Textract at AWS that we can do to pull document content, metadata and content in different ways. And then what we would do if they allowed us to scan, because we're not under our privilege model, we're not even allowed to scan without their consent. If they do allow us to scan, then basically we scan, we use it for the designated purpose, and then we rewrap under the encryption key so that we no longer have a generalized access to it unless and until they give us an explicit consent to do something else with it.
I just have some basic question. Where did the original documents come from?
So that's an excellent question. And the documents can come from the individual, the documents can come from an assistant, and then we're working so that organizations can provide documents that individuals can then save to their vault. The next thing we really want to do is to be able to provide the ability to pull from source. So for example, one of the first third-party integrations we're going to build is integration with the VA's Blue Button download, so that you can directly pull from the VA your health records into your data locker instead of pulling it onto the desktop of whatever device you're on. Maybe you're at a library and now you've left all your health records lying around. It's a complex question because many of these documents are not available electronically. So in the electronic health space, obviously a lot is, but getting a copy of a social security card, for example, the SSA does not currently have an electronic social security card that we can pull from source.
And to that point, Noah, are you finding any challenges in trying to do this? Because you, I mean, one example, for instance, in HL7, while we're trying to do advanced directives is, well, Wyoming requires a hard copy DNR that's been notarized, whereas Wisconsin will allow you to do it with an electronic copy that doesn't be notarized, and combining all that, or the cases where they ask for a hard copy of your marriage record or a marriage license or something like that. So.
Yeah, so some of this is skating where the puck is going. And like, you're not going to be able to get through security at an airport with, by showing them your phone with an image of your driver's license. Like, that's not going to work, using an extreme example there. What we are seeing, so for example, with AWS, we've been in a lot of conversations with HUD, and HUD's voucher office has said, for example, if any housing authority anywhere in the country tells you because of their reading of HUD guidelines, they can't accept a digital copy of a document, tell us and we'll change the guideline, because they view that as an obstacle that is an unnecessary obstacle. So I think we're seeing those lifted. We also just saw Congress pass, advance legislation to make e-notarization national. It's currently, I think, 43 states. So we're kind of watching each of those things and trying to get ahead of those various curves. What we find in the benefit space is that there's a lot of we're doing this because we always did it. I think this project would not have been possible 3 years ago before COVID, but the number of organizations that were forced to go digital only or to close their doors to the general public and accept things via email changed a lot. And so I think there's been a generalized mindset shift, and we are not near 100% acceptance of digital documents today, but I'd say that we're probably an order of magnitude closer to it than we were, call it 3 years ago. And I think that the velocity with which we're moving towards it is accelerated.
Yeah, and I'm kind of sitting here churning on it because I understand we focus on health equity and community-based organizations and the like. But everything you're telling me as a guy that I realized a couple of years ago, I would probably be the only one in the room here that's in a disaster area, but now there's probably quite a few of you. From a disaster area perspective, for those who don't know, you're in Kentucky and a flood comes through and wipes out your house, you're in Paradise and a forest fire burns it down. FEMA shows up and you say, oh, FEMA's here, I need relief. Yeah, great, I'm happy to help you. What do you need? All of my stuff was wiped out. Fine, fill out these 12 forms and we'll give you money back. Well, unfortunately, those 12 forms require documentation and evidence that all just burned down or washed away. And that's been the practice of FEMA for years. So regardless of socioeconomic status and all these other aspects, if you don't have those documents, you're not getting relief from FEMA and you're homeless. So the ability to have this as a contingency plan for anyone to be able to use who has any threat that they may get FEMA have to go to FEMA for assistance, this would be a great tool.
So to that point, you're 1,000% correct, Jim. And one thing I'll say just as a meta point is that one of the learnings that we have had is that actually, once someone is at the point where they're needing emergency shelter, like Kiip is not the tool they need. They're at the fundamental layer of Maslow's hierarchy. They need shelter, they need health, they need food, they need security, and Kiip is something that will help them the next time. Where we really see ourselves as needing to play in the space that we need to be operating in is in the at-risk community, because we can help people avoid slipping into the worst outcomes. We can make their lives better by just making things easier. and reducing cognitive burden, which is enormous for people who are living at or near poverty. But also, if you wind up in those worst outcomes, disaster preparedness is one that is not socioeconomically correlated, but certainly things like homelessness have higher correlation to it. We can help you get back out faster. And I posted in the chat there, ready.gov, which is from FEMA, and one of their explicit things that they say everyone should have is important family documents such as copies of insurance policies, identification, and bank account records saved electronically or in a waterproof portable container. Now, nobody grabs that container when the forest fire is coming. Nobody grabs that container when the floodwaters are rising in the middle of the night. But you are absolutely right. FEMA will say, prove that house is yours before we start giving you aid for the house. And getting that deed or proving that your family is your family are really painful. And this is actually a global problem. A friend of mine who's a senior disaster risk manager at the World Bank, when they are handing out rice after an earthquake in Haiti, they need documents from individuals to make sure they're not giving 2 allotments to the same household. It's a global problem.
Noah, could you explain a little bit more about the room, how an organization goes about purchasing these rooms?
Sure. It's very simple. They can sign up with us. It's a straightforward agreement, and they then have several account roles. They have an account owner, and the account owner can designate administrators in their account, and the administrators can add and remove what we call representatives. Representatives can enter rooms and can view the documents there and interact with the client in the room. Everything is tracked in activity logs that are transparent to both sides. So the individual and the organization can see those activity logs. The organization purchases rooms basically in blocks of 25. So what we do is we say, okay, so how many do you think you're going to need? Come up with a number that makes sense. That's the base contract. If you need more, we're a public benefit corporation working heavily with nonprofits. So we're not very mercenary about saying, oh, we're going to cut you off the minute you're won over. Instead, we reach out if it feels like you're getting near your limits and say, hey, do you need some more? And then when it comes time to renew, we sit down and say, let's look at what you needed last year. What do you think you'll need this year? And the pricing for us is, depending on the type of organization, the pricing can vary, but our current list price is $5 for a room for the year.
The thing that's really nice about the room model is it allows a person in need to engage with multiple organizations without having to have multiple lockers, right? They've just got their stuff in one place. So the organizations go to different rooms, but that's kind of irrelevant to the individual whose documents it is. They just share with whomever they want.
My question to, go for it, sorry.
No, please ask.
It's just, again, basics. Each person would have a room. That's how this works. It's $5 for a person to have a room and they put all of their information in that room.
It is $5 on the organization side. We do not charge individuals.
I see. I'm just making this up. I have, 1,800 people waiting for a Section 8. I can give them a room so they can get all their documents as we process them to make sure that they can go through the application process quicker and easier.
Correct.
And you've done this someplace else?
Yeah, we're rolling out currently in a variety of different locations with different types of organizations.
Have you been involved with anybody from New York City, given the emergency service vouchers that have been given to localities for housing?
We've been involved with a lot of people from New York City. New York City is a very unique jurisdiction. Are you here in New York, Marianne?
Yes, that's why I was asking that.
Which organization or department are you with?
I'm with City Hall. I'm with a group called CIDI. We're a data analytical unit of Health and Human Services and Strategic Innovation.
Okay, so the original group that we actually partnered with was the Office of Economic Opportunity. I'm located here in New York City, actually. I can probably wave to your office from where I am. The problem that we encountered in rolling out with New York City is something that is incredibly unique to New York City, which is Do It. And Do It, unfortunately, believes that Do It should run all software itself internally. And Do It has spent the last 2 years trying to roll this out internally, but has thus far not succeeded. We have continued to offer it as a SaaS solution, and we have continued to have conversations with folks in New York about that. But Do It has been the obstacle, not the agencies that want to use it.
No, unfortunately, that's not unique to New York. Around the country.
It is not New York. It is still a 21st century phenomenon between those people who think they need to have a server under their desk versus something in the cloud.
New York just does it at an epic scale. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I appreciate that. I don't want to run around saying, "Hey, I got this new idea. Here's this company who can do this." So it's good.
Yeah, but Marianne, maybe you can get Do It to move off the block.
Yeah,
And I'll just throw out there, I don't want to be an ad for AWS. No offense, Mary Sarah, but I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking about, if I could run your metadata through SageMaker, I could generate the analytics that would give you everything you needed, Mary Ann, without any computation requirements. It would give you all the data sliced and diced. So,
yeah, there's a lot of data that's hidden behind these flows of information, and that's not lost on us.
Noah, one last question, at least for me. How scalable is this? Because I'm thinking of organizations that have 20,000, 30,000 participants. And so if they were by a room, that's a lot of rooms.
It's a lot of rooms. It is a lot of rooms. And so as organizations are larger, that pricing comes down. We're able to work towards pricing models that make sense at scale. One of the organizations that we've been in a conversation with for some time is Access in Arizona. Mary Sarah has been deep in those conversations. In their case, they were talking about an initial rollout of 350,000 rooms with the idea of scaling up to all 2 million Access members. So from a scale perspective, there's one question about pricing model and coming up with pricing that works for organizations based on the number of people that they need. And we can work with you on that. And the other question is just technically, 20, 30,000 users doesn't even begin to approach an issue here. And just to give a little context, there is one great example of something very similar to what we do out there in the world today. And that is DigiLocker in India. It runs on AWS. It currently has about 110 million users. They're storing somewhere between 5 and 6 billion documents. And it's a phenomenal success, works incredibly well. And we're very lucky to run on AWS because technical scale is not a problem for us.
So Noah, let me, I know you have a document here. I want to think for a moment about the problem we're trying to solve. Obviously, individually, this is terrific for somebody who's applying. For care coordination service, so you've got, just think about New York, for instance, right, or the potential proof of concept in the Bronx, where you've got the EHR coming through the healthcare systems, you've got behavioral health organizations, FQHCs, you've got a whole variety of different sort of city agencies, and then you got a bunch of nonprofits who are sort of providing, sort of working with the people to gather their consents and make them available when they're requested, or if they're requested. our vision, as you might have seen in the architectural design, we're happy to share that, is for almost like a federated system to be able to say, okay, where are the consents in this community? Oh, there's a consent store over here for this particular organization, you know, and they would want to be able to basically ping that to say, does Noah have an active consent to be able to share that they authorize the sharing of their information between them and a, you know, behavioral health organization or a housing organization or something else like that. Not that the utility would need to, you know, actually obtain the consent. They would just need to know that there's an active one available that would cover that particular service. So they could say, yeah, you guys can then talk, you guys can share information we've authorized or we've identified, or we've confirmed that there's an active consent available. So it's that interaction with that central utility model that's saying, yeah, there's consents here, there's consents there. Is that making sense to you in terms of how we would think about interacting with this consent store, so to speak?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we'd want to just dig a little bit through some of the UX and understand sort of how we can sort of who's consuming the consent that needs to travel with the interaction. So, for example, you know, is it a situation where when you open a room with an organization, or when the organization invites you to open a room, whichever way that goes, that we bake in a sort of consent journey there, where it basically says this organization is a participant in the, you know, shared consent model. You know, we've gathered an e-signature from you previously. Would you like to add them as a, you know, I sort of think of it, and again, I just saw your model very briefly, so I don't know the model, but, you know, I sort of think of it a little bit like when you have an insurance and you need to present, you know, kind of, what do they call it? When you need to provide a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an organization is like, hey, can you send us a
attestation? No,
it's not the attestation. It's like when an additional insured.
Certificate.
Yeah, like a certificate of additional insurance. That I wonder if it's sort of a model that's kind of like that, so that you could sort of say, okay, well, we have a master consent here, and then we bolted on, here's all the organizations that you have explicitly approved to be added to the master consent. And the master consent is a, you know, almost like a public key encryption model, where it's like the master consent is publicly available to any organization that you have added to it, so they can all see that you've approved it and added them, and it's done explicit. Am I playing in the right space here?
Yep.
Yeah, and I'd add, Noah, that part of where I think you kind of plug in with the model is that, you know, we've spent time talking about applying some of the demo systems or the proofs of concept to leverage attribute-based access control. So in the pre-process workflow of setting up a data room between X organization and the individual saying, I'm going to put these things in the data room. I pre-consent to them being used for this specific purpose that involves organizations A, B, and C. The attribute-based access controls are the rules to then say, okay, when somebody from organization A goes to log in to get this stuff, it's built around their role as well as the organization they're coming from and what they're looking for, which can all be preloaded rules to then get into that reading room and get what they need.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably move it up. Again, I need to actually sit down and put some real thought into this, but off the top of my head, I would probably move it up a level and just say that because our model is an explicit share model for the documents, that I would have the full consent completed at the time of share, rather than having it as a half completed consent. Like the room is opened, therefore it is a space of consent. I feel like we're describing other activities here, but it's a space of data consent with this consent model that has been approved. And so each party, if they're adding things to it, the language around that
Right.
I'm feeling my way through the idea, but I think
No,
But you've still got an
that makes
access and
sense, no, because I think it kind of mirrors the New York opt-in HIE consent, where we have to have that explicit consent on record before, because that's what unlocks the access by the person who wants to go get the information. So the consent's there as a condition of that person being able to enter our HIE room for Kathy Miller. That's what you're saying, I think. That makes a lot of sense.
And I'm thinking about like coordinated care, right? So part of New York is this integrated care for kids model. We might need a consent, Inc. might need a consent for sharing attendance information from the school, assuming that the school information system doesn't have that now. The parent would be asked, in a understandable way, yes, I'm authorizing sharing of my kids' attendance data, nutrition, whatever the various different kinds of consents, whether it's HIPAA consent, 42 CFR, whatever it might be there, so that when the entity says, okay, we want to coordinate care, there are those consents. We've identified that there are those consents that have been shared, that have been completed, and that could be then shared with the authorized body, the coordinated body. So there would be a set of pre-designed consent forms that would obviously, meet the regulatory and the statutory needs. And that might be 1, it might be 5, it might be 10 for a particular individual or particular family.
Yeah. And that you effectively would have, so I could see those sitting in your Kiip vault, like your other documents, and effectively they're there so someone could ask for an explicit share of just the consent document, but they also could be programmatically baked into certain types of interactions. I think, Jim just added to the chat something that I'd agree with, which is it's quite interesting, the idea of just baking it into the interaction, so that you sort of, you get the individual to approve the consent form, and then each room you open up becomes that kind of addendum, and it's downloadable by the receiving organization so they can have it for their records to say, hey, in this room is now this auto-generated document. It's sort of not an explicit document that was shared, but instead it was like auto added and permanent, because it was baked into the fact that the individual chose to share a document with you, came this second consent document.
Right.
Yeah, it's still a way of enforcing a least privilege on a user account in some fashion, to say, because I mean, and I don't want to complicate it, but it seems like when you have those multiple people in the organizations, and Kathy, you could correct me, you may have someone as a case manager who has access to all the content in a room. There may be another analyst or someone on staff who only gets to look at one thing in that room, but has consent as part of that organization. And that's, kind of a least privilege sort of way to manage the data.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think one of our jobs in what we're doing is also to be advocates for those individual users, and recognizing that we are trying to balance the equities of providing all of the legal frameworks necessary to enable the interactions that we need to enable, but at the same time trying to really reduce the complexity on the individual, so that this doesn't feel scary or complex, but it feels transparent.
Yeah, that's a good question. Chuck just put a question in the chat here, which is something that a few counties are doing now. They have a universal consent. So you basically go through, it's 2 pages, and you're providing your consent for all the services that county is going to be able to provide to you, as opposed to signing a separate, FERPA consent, HIPAA consent, and 42 CFR. That's one of the questions. So yeah, that's an interesting question.
I mean, but the thing that I really, the thing about this organization and what you're doing that really gets me excited is to get away from that. which is to instead say, can we come up with more universal consent models so that an individual isn't constantly having to, the system will have a lot of friction if you're making someone sign individual agreements with lots of different organizations.
Right.
And yeah, and Mary Sarah makes a good point that Kiip is independent from the form. Now, we're not going to change everyone's rules and all the legislation around that all at once, but to the extent possible, like what we're focused on is the user delivering the documents to the organizations in a way that the organization now has the right to do with it what they need.
Right.
And the more obstacles we put in that process, the less helpful this is going to be for everyone, and the more we're just going to stack back on the
Right.
cognitive load.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it you know, partially depends on, there are some integrated counties that have super agencies, and they have responsibility for all those programs. They can do that, and they can work with their people that they're serving and go through that consent process. They've got it, and it's all in one place. Because I agree, I think having multiple consents that you're signing multiple times during the year, and it's just an overwhelming, which is a real consideration or a real concern there.
Yeah.
Shelley has a question: is the paying customer, if the paying customer is the organization, then who owns the content, forms, and data? Paying customer is the organization.
The paying customer is the organization, then who owns the content, forms, data, et cetera. So the way our model works is that the let me think about how to explain this. What we want to avoid is situations where there's many different copies of the documentation stored on the system in different places with different access privileges. So our model has the documents, essentially three parts to the system at a technical level. You have a user front end that individuals can access their content through, their vault and their data rooms. You have an organization portal where organizations can log in and they can see the data rooms that they have access to. And then you essentially have this giant encrypted heap, which is some gobbledygook that, when properly decrypted one by one, is actually the documents themselves. The individual controls the documents in that heap and controls who has access to them. So when an individual shares to a room, they're actually not making a copy of a document and putting it into the possession of the organization. They are instead providing the organization with effectively a voucher that allows the organization to decrypt and view that document. The organization can view the document and the organization can download the document, but the organization is actually not storing documents on Kiip. The individual is storing their documents on Kiip, and the organization has access to those documents. Now, this is a really key thing to understand about the system, because what it means is that Kiip does not, from an organization perspective, and this is important for many jurisdictions in terms of how they categorize Kiip as a service, Kiip is not storing PII. Kiip handles PII for organizations, but it is not a permanent store of PII for organizations. The data that is stored is fully encrypted, and we actually don't know whether that information is PII or not, because we don't have the ability on our side to necessarily decrypt it. But to the extent that it is tied to the individuals. Now, so the consent that is being given is the view and download consent. It is not store on platform consent on the organization side, because if we did that, then we would now need to be storing multiple copies of this information, and an individual would lose visibility into what was happening with their data on the platform.
So can they differentiate whether they have view privileges or download privileges?
we don't currently differentiate those because frankly, if you can view it, you can screenshot it and now you've downloaded it. So it's kind of you could differentiate it, but you'd not, like you got to go through a lot of effort to try and prevent people from really capturing it at that point.
So Noah, simplifying it, it's really a role-based model.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm the participant or individual. I have the most power, and I just give access to other users, organizations, and I determine what they have access to. So it's really role-based.
Yes. Okay. Under the hood, that's pretty much what it is. It's a little more complicated than just, kind of setting your RWX numbers correctly on a file, because documents are encrypted, and then the voucher actually is a separate encryption key. So we know so that it is unique to the organization and the document and the individual. This basically works as a crypto anchor for us, so that let me be crystal clear when I say crypto, not like Web3 crypto, we don't mess around with that, but a cryptographic anchor, meaning that each document is separately encrypted, rather than the whole S3 bucket being just generalized encrypted. The advantage of that is that the encryption is tied to the individual user. And then if someone were to successfully get into the S3 bucket, they would then have to individually break into each document. So we are able to do that because we're not harvesting data out of the documents. That would be a really expensive way to store documents if you were trying to do large scale content aggregation. But in our data model, we can do that.
A quick question, and if you covered this, I apologize. I was going for about 10 minutes. Are there vulnerabilities that you acknowledge? I mean, are there things that you're still struggling with or targeting to nail down? Or do you feel, how far along do you feel you are in sort of the security part of it?
The security, I think we feel quite confident in. That we've spent a lot of time in the foundations of it. We've gone through AWS's well-architected security review, and we have some folks who are very, very skilled working on that piece of it. So the things that I described, are there. There's some more things we want to do, some more interesting things we want to do in terms of the security model that even actually pulls things apart a little bit further. But we feel quite confident in that. Our identity management system is AWS's Cognito system, which is, I think best in breed, HIPAA compliant, all the usual ISO boxes checked. So we rely on AWS's infrastructure for a number of these tools, but I think they're probably going to do it better than we would do it if we tried to build it by hand.
Okay, thank you.
And no, just out of curiosity, is that also an AWS-based encrypted file system, or did you apply that as part of the RDBMS structure when you set it up?
So we use S3 for storing the documents. We use our S3 encryption to secure the S3 bucket generalized, but then the individual documents are also encrypted. So basically, the document gets encrypted on upload, before it goes through SSL, TLS, and then we try to avoid at all costs ever messing with the encryption of the individual documents. But then we also just use S3's generalized encryption over the whole bucket as well. One of the things that we'll look at in the future, Jim, is potentially moving some documents out to colder storage when we get the sense that they are sort of not being touched for a long period of time, because it might be more efficient to move them into a form of storage other than S3, like a lower, something that's like not millisecond access, but maybe microsecond access or what have you.
EC2 bucket or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, no, I want to thank you for presenting here. I think certainly have given us a lot of things to think about, and I think a lot of interest in sort of digging a little bit underneath a little deeper down as we look at you know, the architecture and the approach that we want to at least begin to design into something that would be replicable, but would be useful both for New York and for Minnesota and potentially California. But then also, how replicable would that be, particularly for those areas that will need the kind of consent tools that you may offer here. So I think this is great. I know there's people not on the call today that are really quite interested in this, and we do record this, so we'll make that available to folks coming after this call here.
I was just going to say thank you, Daniel, for inviting us, letting us take over your meeting for a while.
Sure.
Thanks everyone for the calls. Marianne, I want to say for the record, like, I want this in New York more than I want it anywhere else. So don't take my my feelings about our experience to date as my feelings about the experience that I want to have going forward. So I will happily work with you to pound the pavement here in the city. This is my home city. And I think, and I should also note, Cornell Tech did a great report called a Tech Agenda for the Next Administration. And in it, they explicitly called for a data locker for New York citizens. The thing they called for was our data locker. They even mentioned the city of Baltimore doing it using our data locker. So I feel particularly strongly that New York should be doing this. And yep, there it is, the Rebooting NYC that Jesse just posted in the chat. I think it's section 4.1 of that is their call for exactly this, because it would be a great service to the citizens of New York.
I couldn't agree more. I'm very excited to hear this, and I didn't know you were working with the group, and I'll do my own internal research and find out what some of the roadblocks are, and perhaps I think there's new people in different positions who will be very, very interested in this. So I really, it looks like a really promising product that we should, thoroughly review and think about, because lots of issues talk about government inefficiencies and trying to get these vouchers out the door, and never mind finding housing, but just getting people eligible is a big challenge.
Absolutely. And the AWS team can talk about, we've been very deep in with HUD, who I know is really interested in New York, especially with the EHVs, trying to see better uptake rates, or better activation rates, I should say.
Yeah, and it's something I'm personally very concerned about. And we're on calls twice a week, trying to make sure that we meet our targets, and it's a tough situation.
Yeah, and they are eager to support that, and are very focused on it. We actually just earlier today had a call with folks in LA County, and we're meeting next week with some more folks in LA County. It looks like, actually as of today, I'm really excited to say that it looks like Hopix, which is one of the coordinators in LA County, is going to come on Kiip, and they're going to bring on, their plan is to bring on 25 of the CBOs that they work with in the 6th district there, to run a really localized intensive around using it, which we're incredibly excited about. And if LA is going to do it, then darn it, I want my home city to do it.
Yeah, that's great. That's such a great point, Jim. Noah, so I will do my personal best on this. It's an exciting possibility.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mentioned in the chat that one of Daniel's good friends, who he's introduced me to as well, Michael Wilkeming, is a detail lead at OMB, and they have the administration has a goal, a vision, to reduce citizen-centric services times down to like 30 minutes. So regardless of what you're applying for, disaster relief, SNAP, TANF, Medicaid, whatever, the process of the citizen interaction should be 30 minutes. And as we've discussed here, there's all kinds of challenges with it. I think just what you've learned on a case-by-case basis, notwithstanding that the Kiip technology and your company personally, would be great feedback for him to understand, hey, maybe it's not Kiip, but either way, we have to look at this as part of that business process to be able to ever get close to doing it. So.
Yeah, Well, please, I'm happy to talk to anyone and everyone. You know, like I said, we're a public benefit corporation, so we have a mission, and our mission is to reduce administrative burdens. The performance management agenda of this administration is great. They've got those 5 key life events, and we think that we address a lot of those and try to make them a lot smoother. So yeah.
Well, that sounds great. It sounds like there are a lot of overlapping interests and connections, and after LA gets it up, we can bring it over to San Diego. They're certainly interested in it, and maybe one of our pilot sites as we go forward.
I should note for those of you in California that I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but the CHCF, we've been talking to the California Healthcare Foundation, who works very closely with California's Medicaid office, and they've been closely tracking us and are eager to see how this could help with Medicaid enrollment in California.
Great. Well, one of the areas that we'll be talking about, actually, we spoke about, well, actually, we didn't speak about it, but next week, you know, the whole area of juvenile justice and young people in foster care and diversion programs and reentry programs is also another important area for document storage and independence. So let me just put a plug in for next week. As I said earlier, Christy Love, who's the acting director at the DC Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, who probably doesn't know about what you're doing in DC, could be also of great interest. And it expands it from our mission perspective out to the justice community, and trying to link in and do some more connecting and some more coordination with that particular domain. Which we heard from Connor last week is one of the areas within Minnesota and within Hennepin that they've written into their goal is to make sure they're bringing justice into their housing and their healthcare work that they're doing there. So so just, you know, same place, same time. Feel free to stop by if you want. To hear that story. And with that, I think we are concluding today's activities. As I said, we'll post the YouTube on the NIC site for folks who may want to review it or to share it with others. And I want to again thank Noah and your team for coming today, and for Mary Sarah for making the introduction. I think there's a lot of follow-ups from today's meeting, and I know that, as I said earlier on, Brian Hanspicker from our team will ideally be interested in looking at this and seeing how we integrate it with the work that the Bronx Rio is doing as well, and other places there. So have a great rest of the day, everybody, and we will see you next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you very much. Thanks a lot.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Terrific presentation.
Thank you.